5 years ago, Michael Drosnin sealed 3 extraordinary predictions in an envelope and gave them to a top Manhattan lawyer for safekeeping.
There it is.
In 2003, he opened it.
The warnings that are most clearly stated in the code are: A, the world will face global economic collapse starting in the Hebrew year 5762. 2002 in the modern calendar. You know, that one came true. B, this will lead to a period of unprecedented danger as nations with nuclear weapons become unstable and terrorists can buy or steal the power to destroy whole cities. After 9/11, no one doubts it. And then, of course, there's the most terrible of the 3 predictions. God help us if this one comes true. The danger will peak in the Hebrew year 5766, 2006 in the modern calendar, the year that is most clearly encoded with both World War and atomic holocaust.
He says the predictions need not come true. They're a warning to the world to change its ways. The basis for it all is a code, which he says has been found in the Bible. What makes it extraordinary is that it appears to be backed by scientific evidence. Michael Drosnin is not the first person to claim to have found hidden messages encoded in the Bible. For thousands of years, people have believed that behind the surface text are coded messages containing extra information. In the Middle Ages, Jewish mystics scoured the Old Testament for concealed meanings. Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist of his age, devoted more than half a century to looking in the Bible for hidden references to Armageddon. Yet few outside religious circles have ever taken the idea of coded messages in the Bible seriously. That was until an exceptional man came along. In 1968, when Russian tanks invaded Czechoslovakia, Eliyahu Rips was a gifted young student of mathematics in Latvia. As demonstrators around the world took to the streets, Rips made an extraordinary personal protest.
Rips went to a public square in Riga, put a gasoline on himself and burned himself to call the attention of the world to this evil act of the Soviet Empire.
Rips was sent to a Soviet psychiatric hospital, a common punishment for political protesters. There, with time on his hands, he worked on a mathematical problem that was to amaze the academic world.
When Rips was in prison, he had the idea to work on a famous unsolved problem called the dimension subgroup conjecture. This had been a problem which Westerners thought they had solved. In fact, there was a published paper in one of the best journals by very esteemed famous people claiming to have solved this conjecture and given a proof of it. When he was in detention, he had no paper to work with, so one of the guards actually got him some pencil and a little piece of toilet paper. Using only this, he was able to refute the greatest minds in the West. He showed this conjecture was actually false, even though all the experts thought they had proven it was true. This turned the subject on its head.
After 2 years, Rips was released and allowed to emigrate. He arrived in Israel with a reputation as a man of unshakable integrity and as a brilliant theoretical mathematician.
Rips is an extraordinary mathematician. I mean, not just an outstanding mathematician. There are many outstanding mathematicians, but he's a world star. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge would be delighted to have Rips as a professor there.
It was now in Israel that Rips was introduced to the world of the Bible codes. One well-known form of code found in the Bible is called a skip code.
Skip codes involve a different way to read a text than we normally do. Usually we read one letter at a time, the first letter, the second letter, and the third letter, and so forth. But with a skip code, we might start with the third letter, and then skip ahead 10 to the 13th letter, and then to the 23rd letter, and so forth. And maybe that would spell out a new word, jumping 10 letters at a time. Here's an example. There's a sentence here that says, "My way of showing a skip code is encrypted in the very words I put down here." Let's take the first letter and jump every 14 and make that red. It's very hard to read as it's written here. We see the letter M, A, R, Y, H, A, D. It's not so legible. So to make it look nicer and understand it better, what we usually do is we break the line before each red letter. So now, we have each line starting with a red letter, and now the red letters are in a column and it's very easy to read. Mary had a little lamb.
One of these simple codes particularly caught Rips's imagination. It appears at the beginning of the Torah, the Jewish Bible, which is made up of the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
When we start with the first T in the book of Genesis, in fact it comes in the first verse. In the beginning God created heaven and earth. Starting with the first T and taking every 50 letters, the word Torah appears.
Exactly the same pattern appeared in the second book of the Torah, Exodus. Again, starting with the first T and skipping 49 letters. The word Torah appears.
It was enough to me to be most intrigued, to think something very interesting might go on.
Rips began to employ a computer program that could search for skip codes like this at enormous speed. He could have had no idea where it would lead. Rips and his colleagues now came across messages nobody had ever found before. One of them is known as the Hanukkah Code.
Hanukkah is an important religious festival in Judaism, and the word Hanukkah is written as a skip code going backwards. Hanukkah. And Another important name associated with Hanukkah is the Hasmonean dynasty. They're written here, Hashmonai. That's the Hebrew word for Hasmoneans. And that's also a skip code. So these two names and concepts are very closely linked, not only in the story of Hanukkah, but also in proximity here as skip codes within the text of the Torah.
To Rips, the implications of the code were breathtaking. The Torah had been written down some 3,000 years ago. The events described in the Hanukkah story took place some 2,000 years later. If this really was a message, then it had been encoded in Genesis thousands of years before the events it describes. This was no longer just a word game. The Bible codes were seeing into the future. Then, Rip stumbled on a message which seemed to confirm this extraordinary power in a very personal way. It was January 1991. The first Gulf War was imminent, and Israel was tensed for an Iraqi attack. The big question was, when would it come?
It was in the early January, and the tension was very high, and in fact it was increasing. A friend showed me a table with a code on which one sees Saddam Hussein.
Near this was a second piece of information.
The most important thing that through this we have actually a Hebrew date. In fact, it says fire on the 3rd of Shvat, which in this year it was on January 18th.
The code seemed to be predicting an attack on January 18. Could it possibly be right? Two weeks later, Rips got his answer. In the early hours of January 18, exactly as predicted, Iraqi missiles hit Israel. Rips, sitting at home with his family, will never forget it.
There was a midnight alert, and we all rushed in the sealed room and put our gas masks on us. There was, of course, a sense of horror of all this event. Nevertheless, I recall I was overfilled with a sense of a scientific joy. The codes work. Just think about it. When you analyze in a proper way the letters in an ancient book that exists for thousands of years, you're able to tell about such a major present event as a missile flying right at your head.
Eliyahu Rips is a rigorous scientist. He now wondered, was it all just a coincidence, or could he find serious scientific evidence for the codes? Rips had noticed that what characterized the Bible code messages was that the information appeared as a cluster of related words. What he needed was a way of determining whether this clustering was significant or accidental. Rips had heard of research suggesting that the names of famous rabbis might be encrypted in the Bible close to their dates. He decided to build an experiment around them. An expert was asked to provide a list of 32 rabbis paired with their dates of birth or death. All had lived long after the Bible had been written. Then, Rips searched Genesis for each pair.
For each of the resulting pairs of a name and date, we checked in the book of Genesis. As we see here an example, on this table, the name of the holy Or HaChaim comes together with the date of his death, which is 15th of Tammuz. So there is a close meeting between the date and the name.
Rips now constructed a complicated geometrical formula to quantify how close these clusterings were. He called this the measure of compactness or closeness.
What they do is they consider sage A and date 1, and then they take a page of text. Sage A might look like that. Date 1 might be something like this. What they do is define a distance or measure of closeness, physical closeness in the text between these two. And there will be distances for each of these pairs going down with 32 in all.
Rips then hypothesized that if the rabbis and their dates had been deliberately encoded in the Bible, then the measures of compactness would be smaller than in a random list of names and dates. So for comparison, he jumbled up the names and dates and generated almost 1 million randomly paired lists and searched Genesis for these. The result seemed absolutely conclusive. The average measure of compactness was much smaller in the real list than in more than 999,000 random lists. Rips now calculated the odds against this happening by chance. They were 62,500 to 1. One of the best mathematical minds in the world seemed to have found strong scientific evidence that there really are codes in the Bible that can see into the future.
Vividly in your face you see something that kind of a living miracle, and it was a very strong feeling that I cannot forget. Now gradually one gets used to it, yes, even one can be used to miracles.
Rips and his team sent their extraordinary findings to Professor Robert Cass. Cass is a statistician who then ran a prominent statistical journal. He didn't believe for a moment that the results could be right.
I had it sent out to referees. I assumed that the referees would find the flaw rather quickly and that would be the end of the story. Well, that's not what happened.
The referees could find no fatal flaws in the analysis. Cass took the relatively unusual step of sending it out for further scrutiny.
I sent it to a third referee, and the third referee had very specific suggestions for additional analyses that the authors should do. The authors did those additional analyses. The referee said, I think this will end the story, but when the authors did the additional analyses, in fact, the effect persisted. And at that point, the referees really said they were baffled. They didn't for a moment believe it, but they couldn't see what was wrong.
Cass had no choice but to publish it. Meanwhile, in New York, another man was also looking at the codes. Michael Drosnin is a successful investigative reporter. He's worked in the past for the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. He considers himself a man who deals in facts, not fortune-telling. In the early 1990s, he heard about Rip's work and went to see him.
This I already have. I thought that I'd be out of there within an hour, certain that this was all fantasy. Instead, I spent a week with Dr. Rips, and at the end of the week, I was certain he was on to something real.
Drosnin returned to New York, taking with him a copy of Rips's computer program. For months, he tested it out. Message after message appeared.
I looked for events that had already happened, the Kennedy assassination. President Kennedy appeared once, encoded in the Bible. Then I saw the next three letters in Hebrew told of his assassination. It said, to die.
He looked for other things. He found references to President Clinton's election, the first moon landing, the Watergate scandal, and the Oklahoma City bombing. Then, he came across a message that would change his life.
I was looking for the names of world leaders. I typed in the name of the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. It was encoded once, and crossing his name in perfect Hebrew, it said, assassin will assassinate. Just like in a crossword puzzle, Yitzhak Rabin going down, assassin that will assassinate, crossing his name.
Drosnin checked with Professor Rips to see whether the combination of words could be accidental. He calculated that the odds were 6,000 to 1 against it being chance. Within a week, Drosnin was in Israel with a warning.
I'm an American. Thank you.
There, he wrote a letter to Rabin.
I have uncovered information that suggests your life is in danger. We should meet in confidence.
But Rabin wouldn't see him. Then, a year later, almost exactly 12 months after Drosnin's prediction, Rabin was gunned down by an Israeli extremist.
I remember this so well. I actually sunk to the floor. And it wasn't the fact that Rabin had been killed. That was not the shock, as great a shock as that was. The shock was that the Bible code was real. I had believed it in my head, or I never would have won the prime minister. But I didn't believe it in my heart. I didn't believe it in my gut. And at that moment, I did.
In 1997, Drosnin published a controversial book on the Bible codes. It was a runaway hit. It was soon after this that he came across the 3 apocalyptic predictions that would come to dominate his life. Economic collapse, world instability, and nuclear holocaust in 2006. For Michael Drosnin, it was time to warn the world.
I don't know what to do. Give me your advice. Shimon Peres asked me to call and arrange the meeting with him for this week.
Drosnin has had meetings with Israeli intelligence, the Pentagon, and some political leaders.
The suggestion that is encoded in the Bible is that terrorism can actually bring on the destruction of our entire world. I think there's a very good chance that President Bush will meet with me. He's religious and sincerely so. He believes in prophecy. So this will not be difficult for him to accept.
He knows it sounds incredible, but Drosnin is so confident he's right that some years ago he issued a challenge. When my critics find, in advance, a message about the assassination of a prime minister encrypted in Moby Dick, I'll believe them. He was about to encounter someone who would challenge the very existence of the codes. Brendan McKay is an expert in advanced probability theory. He's been investigating mathematical mysteries for almost 30 years. He decided to take up Drosnin's challenge. He bought a copy of the 150-year-old American novel Moby Dick, and, using a
We have Mr. Drosnin's example of Yitzhak Rabin and assassin who will assassinate. Compare that to Moby Dick. Here we have Kennedy, Kennedy, and underneath his name it writes, "He shall be killed."
There were also references to more recent events.
Here you see in the vertical line the word Lady Diana, and across very near to her name it says, "Mortal in these jaws of death." Even that much would be interesting, but there's very much more in this picture. Here, for example, we see the word Wales, Princess of Wales, together with the word royal, R-O-Y-A-L. Also in the same picture, the name of her boyfriend Dodi appears many times. I've marked 2 of them. And finally, the driver of the car, Henri Paul, is named just here. We have Henri and Paul.
Mackay has made it very clear. These are not statistically significant messages. All they show, he says, is that you can find things that look extraordinary, even messages that seem to see into the future, if you look for long enough in a big enough text.
What's really going on, of course, is that the computer can search in so many ways, millions or hundreds of millions of ways, that even though any particular pattern is unlikely, it's going to find something sooner or later.
But Drosnin will have none of it. He claims there